Good afternoon. How are you? Is it too loud? I tell people I don't need a microphone, but I guess I need to. My name is Evren Eryurek. I am the product director for data analytics in Google Cloud. And today I am so happy to introduce you to one of our key partners, Collibra. They provide data governance technologies and workflow management solutions. And Jim and Koen are going to join me. We wanted to share what we're doing together and give you a visibility. Many of you are probably using Collibra. May I get a few hands? Who's using Collibra today? Nice. This is really good. And so we'll do some demo and so forth, but hopefully we'll give you an opportunity to ask some questions too. With that, let's start with this. Before I go any further, in your apps, you know, we're a very data-driven company. The feedback that you give to us is our data. Please share what you think, how we can improve, and this is sort of my plug, and there's a nice app for it, and so forth. So here's the trio who will present to you. I want to get off the stage and turn it over to our partners, but I wanted to set the stage. How many of you have read the use case on US Coast Guard's data governance activities? So when I read it, I said, wow, data governance saves lives. Actually, they started their journey a few years ago when they realized the data that they were dealing was so trapped, so siloed, and access to it was very difficult. They couldn't even pinpoint where the ships that was in the waters of the nation in US, and this is something that they're supposed to be doing it. So they took on a journey and they said, we're going to break down the silos, we're going to establish a governance around it so that we can actually reach when and if there is an emergency to save lives, which actually did happen in one of the cases. They were able to pinpoint the ship that was in a stress situation. They were able to go there, rescue the passengers in this passenger ship with the system that they put together. They couldn't have achieved that if they didn't have this data governance program that they initiated a few years back. And this is an open public study. All of you can go and find it. Now, this is the good side. How about the not so good side? I'm sure all of you have seen this, right? There's hacking taking place, cyber attacks taking place, lots of data getting lost. It is a cost. It's a cost to the business in every industry, in every vertical, in every customer situation. And I know I don't have to explain that to you. You know, and this is one of the reasons why all of you are here in here. But what do we do about it? So when people get asked, especially the question, the cloud adoption, and it is getting better. 10 years ago, when I was talking about cloud, nobody wanted to talk to me. I was the senior VP and CTO of a very large business of a healthcare unit, and no one wanted to talk to me. They said, nope, not in my world, this and that, and so forth. 10 years forward, all the healthcare companies, banks, and retailers, and so forth, they're all either moving rapidly to clouds, or they have already moved to clouds. But still, the security, data loss, regulatory aspects is top of mind. And to be able to really ease this, to be able to really make this thing easier, there are certain things we have to do to achieve and make this journey much less painful to everyone. And we keep an eye on that, and we do a lot of things. And all the enterprises who come to cloud think about what is it that they want to have. They want to have a reliable, secure, a governed, and trusted. You heard it during the keynote today. A trusted cloud where you can actually be in charge of what you need to do for your own users, for your own customers, for your own clients. And to do this, it takes tools, it takes processes, it takes people, it takes products. And we're going to talk about some of that today. So people ask me, hey, why data governance? Now, there's one way to do it. You can lock your data and not look at it. Well, then you won't get any value out of it either. You want to be able to actually use the data in a governed way in a structured way where you can add value to your business. Today, many of the CDOs, any CDOs in the room? Good, we can pick on them, right? Many of the CDOs are chartered to add new value for their businesses. And how do they do that? They have to discover what type of data they have, who can access and what they can do with it, and if they can do anything with it. So it's all about establishing a governance around the data that they own, around the data that they generate, so that they can add these valuable services for whatever the industry that they're in. There are a few things that we should be considering and doing it as a best practice, as a principle. First is, it's around metadata management. It's all about discovering what type of data you have where and what you can do with it. It's not just getting to the how you create the governance around it. First of all, can we actually discover what type of data I have? Most of the time, when we work with many of the customers, they are struggling in their current world. If they have just begun their journey from their on-prem world to moving to the cloud, one of the things is they don't know what types of data they have where in their on-prem worlds. If we can actually help them close that gap, make that bridge to provide a quality service, to provide a lineage capability, to provide a governance capabilities where they can discover their data in a seamless way, then their journey is going to be much better and much more accelerated. The second one is you have to be able to actually classify your data and put some controls around it. Some of you have probably used it already, our DLP technologies, that you can actually automatically scan and obfuscate many of the PII data. So between Google Cloud Data Catalog and DLP, you can do this thing now automatically. You can identify and say, this column is birth dates, or this column is social security numbers, or whatever, that you want to actually block it, obfuscate it, or limit the access to it. Those data classes are very important, and you can do this thing through this capability. And, of course, you need to be able to provide a very granular access control. Not everybody should have access to everything. Few select people that you're choosing in your organization. You can actually do this thing today in BigQuery, where your data warehouse solutions might be. You can actually provide various tiers at the table level, at the data set level, at the column level, at the row level. These types of securities are needed for any type of a governance that you might be actually putting together for your organization. These are all coming there, and we wanted to sort of highlight what's coming when and so forth. Now, to do this with data catalog and DLP, you can actually, this is a good example of two different personas, how you can classify it, and different personas will have different granularity and granular accesses to that data. You need this. Let's say that you're a manager. You want to be able to see your team's salaries. So you can actually see your team's salaries that are below you, but you shouldn't be seeing it above you. That's the type of level of controls that you would be putting in here. And you can create incidents, you can tag them, you can put the necessary controls integrated with the Google Cloud's IAM system. We have a very comprehensive and governed platform in here, end-to-end, from the moment that we ingest the data to where you have your BI solutions, whatever the technologies you may be using it. This is comprehensive, this is trusted, this is governed, and on top, we have many, many technology partners who are actually building solutions using these principles, using these managed services and native services to build capabilities, solutions that you can actually use, and you can build your own solutions around it. Today, I wanted to talk about this partnership that we have with Collibra. Many of you have indicated you're using it. They are known for their excellence in providing data governance solutions and workflow management. So to me, this is the best of two worlds coming together and actually making your cloud journey and your hybrid world, your multi-cloud journey, your on-prem and cloud journey much more seamless, much more effective. And in here, you will see how Collibra is taking advantage of the native services that we have on GCP, integrating Collibra services on GCP to make your journey much more delightful. Now I'm going to introduce Jim. Jim, come over here, please. I think I have another for you. And Jim will tell you more about what we're doing with Collibra and how it becomes together and why there's a great solution together. Excellent. Jim, take it away.
Hey guys. So Evren did a great job of explaining how we're starting to come together. This slide is illustrating kind of that chocolate and peanut butter coming together, or our 1 + 1 equal something greater than 2 slide. But rather than fixating on this slide, I'm going to explain to you why I think the Collibra story works so well in the use case of Google Cloud as well. So when we talk about how Collibra can operate in a setting of those that are using Google Cloud, one of the best ways to do it is from the perspective of the target user themselves. And so I'm going to explain a journey of data intelligence using a character named Cliff. Think of Cliff as a business user, not someone who writes SQL or can write Python or R or Julian, but they have a job that's predicated on their ability to gain access to trustworthy data to make decisions. And so this is a scenario we're going to take Cliff for. A lot of the stuff underneath help it make it possible for Cliff to operate. And Information Week recently released an article that said there's about 1.5 billion knowledge workers out there that fit the definition of what we mean Cliff. That seems like a really big number. That would be about 1/3 of all working age adults in the world. But let's even cut that in half or cut it down to 1/10. It's still a lot of personal users that are dependent on this, far more than the technical folks we have who can write all the code to do this. So that's our target. So generally it starts, the best way to explain a journey is to talk about the destination. Our destination for Cliff is to treat access to information like a shopping experience. That's exactly what we're going to do for Cliff. We're going to try to give them that kind of e-commerce sense where they can shop for information, get clues and hints, put things into a shopping cart, and when they're at the right time, they can say check out. And we want to make that as easy as possible. And our notion is try to democratize data, much like the internet democratized information. We're trying to make access to all the data that's possibly available for Cliff to use in analysis, understand where the best data is for what Cliff wants to do, and then make it super easy to gain access to it as long as they have approval, even if they don't know how to write code. All right? So that's what we're targeting. So like any journey, they generally start with a kind of the foundation. If you're a runner, the first 3 miles or so in a long race is really important and foundational, and this is the big piece. And so, we use the story of, the famous Abe Lincoln statement. So if I had 6 hours to chop down a tree, I'd use the first 4 hours to sharpen the axe. And that's exactly what this is. If you skip these kind of steps, you might have a very fast tactical project, but you won't have a long-term standing strategic program to run on. And data intelligence is not a project, it's a program. It's a digital transformation of your organization. It's turning data into a driving force for your organizations. And it powers the hundreds and thousands and tens of thousands of users you have around your organization. So the first is a business glossary. Business glossary, think of it as just a language. It's a way to communicate across your entire enterprise, even though you might use different words to mean the same thing, or the same word to mean different things. You'd be surprised at how many large organizations don't have a consistent definition of what customer means. That's problematic. Generally, most of your analysis will start on, okay, tell me how many customers we have. Well, okay, what do you mean by customer? And that becomes just the tip of the iceberg of what a business glossary challenge exists. The next item is data domains. And data domains are the concept of the key nouns that drive your business, like customers, products, locations, employees, et cetera. All transactional activities swirl around the notion of these nouns, and they provide the context. Without them, you've got transactions, but you don't know who it's for or what they did with it or where they did it. So this becomes your canonical model to build all your analysis around. And anyone who's building star schemas, et cetera, is familiar with these kind of concepts. And then finally, and as Evren had mentioned during his pitches, all the things that define governance, the workflows, the user agreements, the standard operating procedures, the retention policy statements, everything around your entire environment. These are the governance pieces that fill in this step 3. It also includes reference data, which are highly shared components and coming to a common taxonomy if you're using different codes and values around your organization or share with other organizations. So once you have that basis, then you get into the next big step, and this is kind of the uphill climb. And think of catalog not as the noun, but as the verb. It's the act of cataloging things. And when we think about catalog, it's anything that is data or uses data. So certainly data sets, but also APIs, reports, algorithms, et cetera, are all aspects that we would consider catalogable assets for your environment. And those are nodes on a graph. And then, of course, when you get down to step 5, the next step is the lineage, which is the edge. It's how did information get from point A to point B, and did anything happen to it on its journey? All right? But going back to number 4, for your large organizations, it's quite possible that you have millions of these assets. And they're not quite useful until you put context on them. The true context is to be able to map them to that canonical data domain that I mentioned before when it's a data asset. Otherwise, you just have a bunch of random stuff that might be named similarly, but you don't know. So you actually don't know if this is the address for a record or something altogether different. A true machine learning-based catalog capability auto-classifies the information as it's capturing it. So think of a virtual appliance that goes to wherever your data is, extracts all the metadata, so it gets the table, the columns, and information you have. But if that's all you have, it's not very useful. Most column names can be quite opaque and not all that useful. So imagine also inspecting the content that's in those fields, and from there use machine learning to make a recommendation as to how that maps to that data domain in number 2. If you do that across your entire enterprise, then you've dramatically automated the process of putting context around all your data. And as an example, if you had 1 million assets and it took you an average of 45 seconds to classify each one of them, it would take you about 6 person years to get it done. So a big value add. As we mentioned, the lineage and use piece, this is how data got from point A to point B. And there's an interesting play with classification and lineage. Imagine if you have 1 million attributes, you probably only maybe have 50,000 unique kinds of concepts of attributes in your organization. Everything else is a copy or a derivative off of where it originally came into your environment. If you've already classified it, why would you try to then go back and have to reclassify it? So we can dramatically speed up our machine learning by inherited classifications from something that's in its lineage root. And that dramatically speeds up how you create new classifiers in your environment and speeds up your overall process of creating a catalog-ready environment for shopping. So we go out and we harvest, parse, and create the lineage in your environment from SQL, from ETL, from reporting in BI, and eventually even going through code like Python, et cetera, to extract it. And then we get into the notion of data profiling. So let's suppose Cliff is looking at 2 or more data sets that contain the same kind of information, and Cliff says, I'm really fascinated by doing an analysis where zip code's really important, because I want to do a geographic pivot. How would Cliff know which data set is better than the other for that? Well, data profiling is the notion of establishing the moral equivalent of a credit score for every column of data you have across all your data sets. So if you have 2 systems that provide zip code, you can say, this one's better than that one. And now Cliff has a clear marker to say, that's the better one to use. And we do that by using Scala while we're actually working with the data set. We profile the information, bring all that detailed information back, and impute a score on top of it to give that clear cue to Cliff for his work. All right, so that's the big slog, and that's building all your data assets over time. Of course, you don't have to be done to get to this point. It's just something that is very important to get enough bootstrapped in the environment to invite Cliff in, and now Cliff starts to use the environment and starts to inform new things you want to do. Now, the example I gave before is Cliff determined between 2 data sets on zip code. But let's suppose Cliff is also interested in date of birth. That's another really key attribute. And let's just suppose the best data set for date of birth is not the same data set as zip code. What's to Cliff to do? Make a compromise and say, well, address is more important to me than date of birth, so I guess I'll go with that one. Well, the data registry's intent, number 7 here, is to say, Cliff, you don't have to compromise. What we've done is we've taken your data from all over your entire enterprise, and so long as it maps to that same data domain, like customer, we'll link it all together for you. We'll actually take an anonymized version of your data, putting it through a hash index, SHA-256, after it's been standardized to account for the normal issues that can happen with attributes. For example, on a name, my formal name is James, but people call me Jim. Some people even from my childhood call me Jimmy. There's a lot of different ways that people do that. Cushman, many people want to start it with a K. It's actually with a C. So those are the common issues that people have, are transposing first and last name. All those things happen to data in a natural way. We account for all that, standardize it, and then we put it through a SHA-256 hash, and then we mash on those tokens. So no PII ever leaves the environment. It's only the encrypted values of it, and we're able to create a lineage or a linkage repository across the entire environment so that Cliff doesn't have to make compromises. Cliff can bring these different records together and create a golden record on the fly, all right? The demand economy is, if we've invited enough Cliffs into our environment and they're being quite successful, I can imagine they're going to have a lot of suggestions for what more they'd like the environment to do. And if there's hundreds of them to every one of us, we're going to get overwhelmed with all their requests. The demand economy is Cliff's ability to say, with a certain amount of virtual currency that I have, I'm willing to put this amount of it behind this request to you, so you can see how important it is to him. And if it's a relatively easy request, well, sure, you're going to grab it and do it. It's what a total capitalist environment would look like. Whereas if he asked for a really hard thing but put almost no coin behind it, it probably would sit out there in the queue forever. So anyone here in product management would realize this is the whole notion of prioritization as you go from ideation and you go further. It says, with limited amount of money, what am I going to spend it on? And so that's what that's meant to do when we introduce Cliffs into our world around data intelligence. So now let's say Cliff has figured out where to get the data for the analysis and has used the different cues that we've given them. His shopping cart is full, but again, Cliff doesn't know how to write code, doesn't know how to go get it. So what's Cliff to do? He's got the equivalent of the instruction manual, but it came in an IKEA box in 1,000 parts. And that's not great for Cliff. So Cliff is like, oh geez, what to do? So what we want to do is a one-click kind of exercise where now Cliff can get out of this by checking out, and we execute everything for them. So step 9 here, Service Broker, is a distributed query engine capability that takes the stuff in the shopping cart and all the metadata we have, generates the SQL that's necessary to extract the information from all those sources, go out to the edge where that actually happens to be, whether it's in a data center, in BigQuery, or anywhere else, and can extract that information and bring it back into a materialized elastic cache for processing. And now it becomes a virtual analytical file for processing without really having to move or create problems with your data. Now, when that actually runs and it pulls that information back, at best it can, it's trying to filter out anything that Cliff is not allowed to see. But sometimes that's not doable at the time you're actually reading from the environment. It's oftentimes not discoverable until you've brought the data together, because it's the combination of information that now makes it something that went from PI to PII in a GDPR or a CCPA context. In which case, there's the second level of filtering, which we call access management. This is the ability to strip out records, attributes, or do masking on this virtualized returned file to remove everything that Cliff is not entitled to see. And at the end, now we have this superset of data that Cliff is now allowed to process. But going back to step 7, where we had the data registry, we now may have some duplicates in this file because it came from multiple systems where they don't share a common identifier. We now use the data registry to say, aha, I've got 3 Jim Cushman records in my file from 3 different systems. Let me now composite that down to a golden record. And I might create rules like, I trust this source over all other sources. What's the most commonly asserted value? Use that one. Which was the one that was last updated, or any other rule like that. At the end of the day, this large materialized elastic analytic file is now a pristine and highly trusted set of records for Cliff to analyze. And now this can be hooked up into any BI or reporting tool that Cliff wants to use. All right. So that, in its own notion, is what we mean by kind of democratizing the data and creating data intelligence. And so, Bob's your uncle now. He can shop. All right, so now we've actually put Cliff in a position with just being walked through a guided interface, finding what he wants, put it into a cart, click checkout, and boom, Bob has the file that he wants. Now, that's an example of leasing information in a virtualized fashion. There's also the notion of leasing information in a more persisted notion. So I want to borrow the data for something, but the system that does the analysis can't work against a virtualized view. And when Koen comes up, he's going to show you some demo ideas around that same notion of borrowing data short term and then eliminating it when you're done with your analysis. But there's also the notion of buying data, which is the equivalent of migrating your analytics environments perhaps from your on-prem data centers to the cloud, which is a big endeavor that many companies such as yourselves are going now. And Collibra, working with companies like Google Cloud, are helping companies figure out how to move information in chunks without breaking stuff. So you're not up forklifting everything all at once, but you're doing it over a period of time without making sure that things break. And using information around our lineage, we can achieve a lot of those objectives. So that's what we mean by establishing this unified data intelligence with us working directly with Google Cloud. Much of the things that we would go out and catalog and build lineage include BigQuery, cloud storage, eventually Looker, and many of the other artifacts that exist, and working on that as a control plane to operate our entire environment. So we'd like to say kind of at the end of this, Cliff being our meme is like water, water everywhere, let's give Cliff a drink. So Koen's going to come up and show how we're going to give Cliff a drink, and he'll give you a demo and show how our integrated solutions work. All right?
Hey, thanks, Jim. So before I go into the software, I wanted to reintroduce Cliff for a second and re-emphasize that Cliff is somebody who works very much with the business. And for this demo, we're actually going to pretend or assume that he works for a global manufacturer. Right, so a company that makes fridges and all kinds of appliances. And one of the key problems that the business has is that stuff breaks down in the supply chain. Sometimes a fridge gets delivered and it's already broken when the consumer gets it. Not good, right? It's bad for NPS score, it's bad for the supply chain and so on. So the business has asked Cliff, like, can you analyze where in the supply chain things break down? And for example, does the skill level of an operator, like somebody that takes something off a truck or loads something on a train, the skill level, the training that they get, does that have something to do with it? So very specific business questions. Okay, so let's have a look at what this all looks like in the software. So I'm going to start the search. We can switch to yeah, thank you. So, as so often the case, Cliff and teams like Cliff are going to start a journey searching for data, right? Finding good data. So, luckily for Cliff, the company runs the Google Cloud platform. He's got a catalog, so he's going to start searching for data, and he knows, based on the discussions that he's had with the business, that this data is described as damages data, distribution, damages, supply chain, and so on. So these are the keywords that he's going to search for. It won't surprise you that the search in the catalog is pretty good. I'm not going to emphasize it too much for this demo, but basically what I'm going to emphasize is the page in the catalog that Cliff ends up with once he does his search. And this is a pretty decent data set for him to start with, because you can see here, there's a good business context like damages, which is exactly what he heard from his business counterparts, distribution, replenishment, and so on. So tells him that this is the right data set, but also it shows that this data set is going to be PII sensitive, or at least certain pieces of it. So it's not going to be that easy for Cliff to just get access to it. In fact, if Cliff simply opens this data set in BigQuery, and then let's say runs a query, right? So let's say that he wants to get to the data. This is the table. Let's say run query in BigQuery. Here we go, maybe star, let's take everything. He's not going to be allowed to. This is not an error, this is 100% by design, because you can see here that some of these, the columns are flagged as sensitive. And because of that, somebody that doesn't have permissions doesn't get access to the data. That's exactly how we want it, right? Now, Cliff has some questions here, right? The question that he has is, who can he talk to about this data? Who are the SMEs? How can he shop for this data? And is there other things related to this data, other contexts that he can learn from, that he can use, that he can make decisions based on? Ultimately, what Cliff wants to do is shop for this data, get actually access to it for a certain period of time for him or his team. So what Cliff is going to do is open this data set in Collibra, and I'll just log in as Cliff here. And let's pause here for a second. So I'm going to explain everything that happens on the screen. The first thing we notice is that we see a lot of the same information, but laid out a bit differently, and then a lot of other context around it as well. The first thing we see is that we've got here some key players that are important in getting access or getting questions answered when it comes to this data. For example, the owner, Joanna, who is somebody who would never log into any of these systems. She's an MD, she sits in boardrooms, don't talk to her about any of this stuff. And then subject matter experts like David English. We see the same tags as the ones in Google in the catalog, and we also see here, for example, that the data set is accepted, and we see that it has 5 stars. Granted, only from one person who voted, but you get the idea. So what does this mean? The way we work is, you could have 1,000 people saying like, oh, I use this data set all the time, it's awesome, it's fantastic, 5 stars. It doesn't matter if the subject matter expert, who is a single person or one of the SMEs, if they say you can't use this data anymore, then we will also not use it anymore, right? Because maybe for strategic reasons, we're moving away from the data, or the data is compromised, or so on. So it's a fine balance between crowdsourcing and governance. At the same time, Cliff also sees that there are similar data sets, maybe with the same amount of columns, but the sensitive ones left out, and maybe some of these data sets aren't in the cloud data lake yet. So maybe they're still residing on Teradata somewhere. But maybe that's easier to get access to because it doesn't contain sensitive data. So this is one of those data sets that Cliff could get access to, or maybe even trigger a movement of data into the cloud, but driven by demand, right? Otherwise it stays behind. Other things we notice is the business context. This is what Jim was talking about, the foundation, right? Very important. It probably shows even better if I go to the details. Without this context, Cliff wouldn't speak the same language as his business counterparts, right? When he talks to them about like demand-driven supply chains, issue-based supply chain development, and the actual definition that are approved by SMEs as well, then he speaks the same language as his business counterparts, and when he searches for data sets, he knows that he can trust it. So this is absolutely very, very, very important. Now, we've got the business context covered. At the same time, we can go to the a bit more technical context, so we can dive into the data elements. And then, for example, look at one of the columns, maybe a city, for example. You see that we auto-classified it with Google machine learning. So let's take the city column. Why do we do this? Well, Cliff might want to zoom in into the data and form an opinion before he actually starts using it. Right? If he's interested in like cities where damages occur more, if this would all say null or NA or nothing, yeah, then he shouldn't use this data. Right? So before we start using it, we want to form an opinion. We've got the profiling results and so on. So I wanted to show that we can go after the business context, but we can also load the technical context. Now, one of the most useful topics or useful tools in Cliff's toolbox is going to be the lineage. Automated lineage that, for example, in this case, I don't know whether you can see it, yeah, you can, I think, show or explain to Cliff that the data that he's looking at, coming from GCP, the damages data set, has already been used in at least one Looker dashboard. So we have the full scanned lineage from Looker, and that's pretty interesting, right? Because there's a Looker dashboard here that's called Damages in Distribution Network. And not only that, when we scanned Looker, we saw that, when it comes up here, that this is a pretty popular model. Oh, I opened the data set, sorry. I was supposed to open this thing, the Looker dashboard, here we go. So, when we scan Looker or Tableau or Power BI or so on, we're going to not only get a thumbnail of what the dashboard would look like, but also, for example, how popular is this report, right? People use this often and they actually favorite it. So maybe rather than going after the data set, this dashboard is what Cliff should be going after. And rather than starting to query or work on things with his team, he might be looking at something that does all the work for him already. So rather than shopping for the data, maybe all he should do is shop for this Looker model or Looker look or dashboard or an API or so on, a whole range of possible things. Now, for the sake of my demo, I'm going to pretend that Cliff doesn't want this dashboard, and he goes back to the data set. So he's seen the data, he kind of understands what it looks like, he could talk to the SME, he's seen the business context. Basically, he likes what he sees, so what he's going to do is he's going to shop for the data. And he adds it to his data basket. Nothing prevents him from shopping for multiple things, so I could shop for the Looker dashboard and so on as well, but I didn't test it in my demo and I don't want to press that button for now. So what I'm going to do now, you see here, right, I added my data set in my shopping basket, and I'm going to check out, or Cliff is going to check out. And a couple of interesting things are going to happen here, and this is really dependent on the business, the business problem here. Imagine if there was already a data sharing agreement between the damages data and the project team, or the supply chain data and the project team. Then Cliff could do one-click shopping, just like you shop online, right? You've already entered your credit card details and you've got your shipping address. That's all approved. All you have to do is click the button and it gets delivered on your doorstep. If this is not in place, however, some things could happen. First of all, it's sensitive data, so it's very likely that we kick off some GDPR process, right? Some due diligence, maybe even a DPIA or a legitimate interest. And this would probably mean that Cliff has to give us some information. Why do you need this data? How are you going to use it? Do you have a legal basis to use it? What's your purpose? And so on. I kept it a bit simpler here, but these forms are typically 30, 40 fields long. So for now, I'm just going to say, like, I need it. And I need it by today, of course. I cannot wait. And let's say that I need it for a year, so that when my lease is up, we could also take the permissions back. And then one hook into GDPR or CCPA for the Americans among us, we need to provide a purpose. If I don't have a purpose to do this, a legitimate interest or a legal basis, we're simply not going to give access to the data. So to keep it simple for myself, I'm just going to say customer management, because in the end, we're trying to improve the experience for the customer. I'm going to submit this, and that's it for Cliff. So he's shopped for data. Now, one thing I want to do here is show how we're actually going to get Joanna, who is the MD, right? She's responsible for this whole data. But remember, she was. So I'm emulating the mobile app here. Now you might be thinking, great, a mobile app, but make no mistake, your biggest problem or your biggest enemy when it comes to digital transformation is resistance to change, right? People staying in their silos, especially when it comes to data. So bringing the mountain to Moses, or Joanna in this case, is very important. And we're going to do that by giving her a couple of things, right? As she sits in that boardroom, she can look up damages. What is that? People keep talking about damages. We can give her the definition, calculation, and so on, so she's right away up to speed. At the same time, we're going to ask her things. For example, the damages project wants to use some of the data that you're responsible for. Can you approve this? Long story short, she approves it. And that's it for Joanna. She didn't have to log in anywhere. We went to her. And Cliff will be notified. So Cliff gets a notification here. You see here, it's only 1 pixel big, but there is a notification. Because he still doesn't have access. What we have here is the MD, whoever was responsible, has approved him or his project team using this data, but he still has to go through some consent, right? We're going to give him some notices. First of all, maybe he got access to the data set, but maybe not to the sensitive columns, which I actually think is the case in this demo. Also, he needs to sign off on a couple of things so that we can make sure that he doesn't do anything that he shouldn't be doing within the context of this data, because it is sensitive data in the end. So Cliff accepts. We register that, of course. And then, for the sake of the demo, I think we can go back here to BigQuery. So we can provision the access management there. And in this case, now Cliff should have permissions to at least see, for example, the city and run that query, if he or somebody in his team would do it, so we can see the city. However, he probably can't see everything yet, because there might still be some permissions. He can. Okay, so he got all the permissions. I thought he wouldn't have been able to, but that's fine. He has access. So what have we shown here? We've shown that we can let Cliff find data, but also understand it in a technical and a business context. And we've allowed him to trust the data. He knows before he shops for it that this is the data that he needs, and that's going to be good for his project. And then at the end, we've allowed him to get access to the data in a way that embeds privacy by design. Right? And that's a pretty good step forward. All right, I'm gonna conclude the demo here. We still have some time, so Evren, Jim, if you want to come on stage, that we can probably take some questions.
Thank you, Koen. That was great. So we have almost 10 minutes. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did, watching how these products come together and how they enable your solutions and so forth. We have mics around, and if you raise your hand, we'll come to you, and there's a question over there. Thank you. I didn't even have to bribe. Usually for the first question, I bribe and give some swag.
Maybe I should have waited.
I know. I spoke. I'm going to give you a Collibra bottle.
Excellent. Very good, interesting demo in terms of the application of data catalog, Collibra, to those quite highly curated and structured data sources. What we're finding in our organization is a growing number of data assets that are being created very dynamically for people as part of their job. I'm just wondering how the tools in data catalog and in Collibra might help manage and curate that estate. So data sets growing by the dozens and dozens every day.
All right, do you want to take it?
Yeah, sure. So is this working? Yeah. So just a little bit more clarity on that. So you're saying that data sets are being generated more dynamically, so it's not as structured in terms of go out, I know that's there. I mean, can I be notified of the existence of a new data set? Is that kind of the heart of it?
Or impromptu, yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, there's a couple of aspects. One is customers are running discovery tools that kind of show you the staging area where all the possible data sets could potentially be. So one, the staging area now becomes kind of like a big earth mover that pulls all the dirt out and puts it in. It's our job to pan for gold. The notion is you don't need to catalog everything that you have in your environment for shopping purposes. You might need it for privacy purposes, for development purposes, et cetera, but putting a bunch of temp tables and other things in your environment can actually create a lot of noise that affects the ability to see the signal. And so we don't want to give Cliff a heart attack when he comes out and looks at all the data and just cannot make a decision. I know when I go shopping, I see too many choices on the shelf, I generally walk away. And we certainly don't want to do that for Cliff. But we do want to make sure you're aware of the existence of all these other data sets. One that's starting to come up more and more now is the use of streaming. So we're seeing a lot of event processing using things like Kafka topics, and those are propping up more and more, and those are becoming assets that also people want to put out in their catalog, so that people are searching for information, they say, aha, that's another place where I might be able to find data, and it's the topic itself that we're actually cataloging.
And in addition to that, if you look at data catalog, it is integrated with PubSub and Dataflow and so forth. It actually helps you with the DLP capability that I had highlighted, real time. So once you say, okay, these are the types of data that I want to classify this way, you don't have to do anything else. So it will be done, especially for the streaming cases, really handfully. Great question. There's a question over there too, actually.
You've spoken a lot about a data catalog and being able to tag information and search for it. But what about the data modeling aspect of information, which is kind of key to data governance?
All right, that's very true.
So a couple things. One is step 2 that we talked about in the journey was data domains.
Yep.
That's the primary point in which we're doing modeling around the key nouns that you drive your business around. Of course, there could be a lot of transactional stuff that can sit around that can make them quite complex. With Collibra, certainly on GCP, we do ship with data models in advance, so you can use them out of the box. You can modify them, or you can ignore them and build your own. But the basic notion is to have a common model that can be used for interoperability around your enterprise. And at some point, once you kind of get your own act together within your own organization, I can imagine a need to start doing inter-organizational data sharing. And without a common notion of what things are, it becomes somewhat impossible. That too then maps up to the business glossary, so you have a common definition of what those terms mean. Now, integrating with technologies like Erwin, et cetera, where people might be doing some of the data modeling tools, is something that we've been working on. But in essence, it would be feeding to us the data model that would go into the data domains themselves. But it's not our intention to build an ERD tool merely just to reflect what someone may have already done with UML or some other modeling capability.
Great.
Thanks very much for a inspirational demo. One of the reasons I came to this talk is because it talked about multi-cloud world, and I know that some less enlightened businesses are using other clouds and even on-prem. I'm assuming, Jim, that the demo kind of abstracts above whatever cloud infrastructure you're sitting in, and that journey you described earlier would work regardless of the infrastructure in the cloud.
Correct.
That's right.
That's
There's an absolute separation between where Collibra runs from a control plane and where the data resides for a company. And so we believe in a heterogeneous world is going to exist forever, or however long the forever might be. But the likelihood you put all your data in one place seems unlikely for large companies. As a result, and as Koen had mentioned, if the mountain won't come to Muhammad, then Muhammad must come to the mountain. We use an edge-based technology to go wherever that data happens to be. And part of that can be delivered through Google Anthos, as an example, using more of the hybrid-based style. But in essence, it's something that lives out on a Kubernetes cluster close to the data center, wherever the data is, including other cloud environments. So if it's on, say, Azure Cloud Storage, as an example, but you want to have your enterprise catalog running on Google Catalog, we'd have an edge component that goes out to Azure Cloud Storage and pulls all the metadata there back. But it's managed and run on GCP, in addition to looking at BigQuery and GCP Catalog.
To add to that, this is another reason why we've partnered with Collibra to really strengthen what we believe in. It's going to be always multi, it's going to be a hybrid world, and we really believe in that. And we want to solve the customer problems and make it as easy as possible without really creating any barriers in between. We just want to make sure that it works for you in whatever the environment that you have. This is why we're partnering with Collibra. Thank you for that question. More? We have about 2.5 more minutes. Please. And there's one more over there, if you can.
So we talked about some integrations which is already in place. What about Bigtable or other things which we have not connected, like even CDF?
Yeah, so anyone here in the integration business, do you ever feel like you're done? Yeah. There will always be more for us to do. We continue to chip away at it. So we're working on native integration. By native meaning that you can consume us as a service and we take care of it for you. I mean, it would be easy for me to stand up here and say, hey, we've got an SDK. As long as you wrap around it, you're all good to go. That puts all the emphasis back on you. We believe in order for this to be truly effective, we need to orchestrate a lot of that integration ourselves. We go out through our database driver technology. We authenticate with the way that system needs to authenticate. We run Git metadata. We run Scala profiling. We capture lineage, et cetera, et cetera. We orchestrate all that for you. That's what full integration means, and we support that entire aspect. We're hitting on all the things that are most commonly being used, from the relational databases to the off-the-shelf products that are well saturated across the globe, to the new cloud environments that folks are moving to. So we can give you a list of what's supported today, what's coming in the next 3 months, and what's coming in the next 3 months after that. And then our customers help influence our priorities all the time.
And then specifically for Google, data fusion is very interesting, of course, because it gives a lot of metadata. So that's probably very short on the list, or on the short list.
It'll be a fully managed service very soon.
How do you handle the culture clash between everybody wants to get to market quicker, everyone wants good quality data, everyone wants decision-based, but nobody wants to build business glossaries and data domains. I've been touting that stuff for donkey's years, trying to get it through, and I believe in it, but it's this real clash between what's sexy, what sells, and what's marketable, and putting in those underlying foundations and the hard work to actually get to that straight-through processing environment.
It's a fantastic question, and we actually built a whole practice around helping our customers setting up a data enablement. And the first thing is like, don't call it governance, for example, because that people think that you're there with a stick, right? But actually, it's about helping them.
Yeah.
So it's not something we can answer in 1 minute, but there's a whole practice around it, basically. But it's about, going to the business, building a short list of use cases, and helping them get to their results.
I've seen a positive change in the past couple of years, going from, hey, I'm going to lock things down, to, hey, this is asset, this is value, I need to do something about it. There's a lot of paper, there's a lot of blogs and so forth that I'm seeing in the marketplace that people are at least approaching it as the, hey, this is an enabler, not as something that I'm going to wall off. But we have some work to do, but it takes people like us to come here and not be shy about it and tell you all about it. But I think we're done. And thank you for your time, and thanks for coming. Remember to give us feedback.
Appreciate it.